Heel hooks are obviously a very effective submission, and you see them all the time in events like ADCC and even MMA events, but you don't see them at IBJJF events. Of course, they're illegal, and in most schools...
You do once in a while.
You do once in a while. People don't know the rules. And also in the gi, most tournaments around the world never do heel hooks. But do you find that heel hooks are good for the average student, or are they too dangerous for the people who aren't really out there competing at these high-level events?
That's a good question. And I think a large part of the perceived danger of heel hooks comes with people's lack of ability to apply them correctly. And I don't mean apply them slowly or anything like that. I mean, if I apply an armbar incorrectly, I can actually be more dangerous to my opponent than if I do it correctly. If I'm jerking down on the arm randomly, and I don't really know what I'm doing with my hips, but I'm just pulling down explosively, you're going to be fine, and then and you're going to see a lot of injuries with arm locks. A lot of people apply heel hooks incorrectly. I'd say most people do. They're ripping across the chest as hard as they can, and there's a lot of play in the leg until through the roll somehow something catches or it becomes static all of a sudden, and then boom, the knee catches and it's a significant injury where you weren't prepared for at all. If they're applied correctly, it's a tight controlling position. You can't roll out that explosively. There's not a lot of movement to be done. The ankle will break first. Like these ligaments will go first, and then the tibia and fibula will turn, and then the knee. So you'll have, the break will travel up, and it'll be slow and controlled. I think people aren't taught heel hooks correctly, and they don't train with them a lot, so they sort of just, oh, heel hook, boom, rip it. And they don't have experience, the training partners don't have experience defending it, and people get hurt. Like I said, if we rarely taught arm bars, and we did them once in a while, and people really didn't know how to do them, they didn't have a good understanding, and they're just yanking at it explosively, yeah, people are gonna get hurt in arm bars a lot. Right? People aren't gonna tap to them because they're not feeling pressure, right? Because you're pulling it the wrong way, You're not bridging in, or you're turning it to your chest. You wouldn't feel pressure, so you wouldn't feel threatened when you were in an arm bar until the person pulled it the right way, and then it's a break. So I think that can be a good analogy to think about, So yeah, they're fine for, beginner students as much as an armbar is fine. I wouldn't teach it to somebody on their first day, because it is a submission which requires control. It's a subtle submission. It's a complicated submission, just like I wouldn't teach a north-south stroke to someone on the first day. Right. It's a subtle submission. You need to understand a bunch of things before you're going to get that submission.
And students need to know how to defend it the right way, right?
Yes, exactly. They need to know when they're in trouble, when they're not. Which is a large part of why I think people get hurt in heel hooks. No one's taught to defend them. Yeah. Arm bars, we know an arm bar. We know when we're in trouble. The legs are over my head, my arm's extended. It's time to tap. If I feel like I'm in a bad spot and I feel a little bit of pain, I'm probably tapping an arm bar. Whereas heel hooks, you see all the time. People are grimacing. They're extending their leg. They're in a bad spot. And they don't recognize when it's time to tap because they just haven't been there a lot. They haven't been taught that a lot. They don't respect the position, which is why I think there's a lot of injuries involved in heel hooks currently because people don't respect the position enough to know to tap. If people didn't respect arm bars, they wouldn't tap. They'd be hurt more often too.
Right. But Eddie, how many knees have you destroyed in training?
I wouldn't say I've destroyed any knees in training. Not destroyed. I've never disabled anyone in training. Typically, what'll happen is we'll go pretty hard, like 2 weeks out from training is when we're training for a match or something, we'll make sure we go fully to submission when we're in it. And when we're outside of it, when we're applying it, we'll go pretty quickly into it. A week before you don't want to damage your training partner or take damage, so you tap a lot earlier and all that. We have a rule in Danaher's class, which is basically as I apply a submission, my job is to apply it slow enough to give you time to tap. Right, in everyday training, that's my job. Your job is to tap, right? It's not my responsibility to protect you. Now, obviously, we're talking about higher level belts training. I'm not saying, a black belt crushing a white belt, like he didn't tap, so I snapped his arm and then wrist locked him, like still didn't tap.
But you've probably been in this situation, I know I have, where you have a submission locked in, you're going slowly, waiting for him to tap, and he's either foolishly trying to do some escape that's not going to work, or he's just not doing anything. And then it's a point where either you're going to injure him, or you're just going to let go. Yeah. What do you do in that case?
It truly depends on the training partner and what they're doing. So there's some high-level guys that are exploring sort of the limits of their limb, and they're okay taking a pop. They are. There's a lot of training partners I have which are more than okay taking a pop, which I'm not sure of the medical effects of that or anything, the long-term effects of that. But they're exploring the lock. So typically, if I see a very high-level guy who's doing that, I'll apply very slowly, consistent pressure, and let him explore the full range of the lock. Oh, this is where the ankle pops, or feeling the tension. So I give my training partner the benefit of that. I assume they know what they're doing. Whereas, if it's a blue belt or someone I don't know, I generally won't go till pop. Right. Especially if they're moving slowly or precisely, or I feel like they're thinking it out. If they're doing wild escapes, I feel like I'll let go very early typically, because I don't want to, because that's when catastrophic injuries happen.
Right.
Typically, you put a heel hook in, somebody stands, they fall the wrong way. That's when you could really hurt somebody. So typically, I'll release very early on those people.
And make it a learning opportunity.
And
right?
make it typically people who are rolling like that aren't going to learn no matter what you do. So I don't necessarily make it a learn. I just don't want to devastatingly hurt somebody, in training. But typically when heel hooks are applied correctly, like I said, the ligaments on the ankle will go first. So people have time. Like if they're applied in a tight, precise manner, the ankle goes first, which is bad, but not that bad. Like 1 or 2 cracks and pops on the ankle usually is enough for anyone to tap, and they'll limp for a week. If you're controlled with it, mind you. If you're explosively going into it, it'll translate to the knee very quickly. And this will tear, the tibia and fibula turn, and then the knee ligaments turn. It's typically the order of break in a heel hook. So, yeah.
My way of thinking about upper body submissions is that if you want to have a good omoplata game, you have to have good arm locks, good triangles, because they all go together. Now let's talk about submissions south of the hips. Can you have a good leg lock game without having heel hooks?
See, that's the question. I know some people have a good IBGF game. Good, right? It's competitive. They can do damage. They've won a lot with a lot of leg locks. And you see a lot of guys coming up with just like an Achilles lock and being very successful with that. So certainly you can be successful without the almighty heel hook. However, heel hook covers a very wide range of the leg lock submissions. It also happens to be the most efficient joint lock that we have in submission grappling, by far. We can apply massive amounts of torque to very, very weak ligaments that scale very well with size, very well with size. Our upper bodies tend to grow proportionally with someone's size. Your ligaments in your knee don't, and the foot actually gets longer, which gives you a longer lever to torque on. So it's sort of, heel hooks are a special submission, and they do have a distinct place. And they are necessary, I think, for a complete leg lock game, yes. That's why you don't see leg lockers in IBGF. Aside from the point structure, the heel hook is the big threat of joint submissions in general, in my opinion.
Right. So. And when you defend once, if you defend a toe hold, oftentimes you end up in a heel hook. Or defend a knee bar, you end up in a heel hook. It all kind of flows together, right?
One of the main problems with leg locks in IBGF tournaments is the person simply turns, exposing a heel hook. You follow your reaping, right? You let go, you just lost the position. All they had to do was just switch their hips.
Right.
So you see this a lot. Like people escape the single leg X position, or ashigrami as we call it, by doing that. And that's, and then they have to transition like kind of a messy sweep. It feels like that submission belongs there, so.
Let's talk about the lockdown for a moment. The lockdown is kind of the industry accepted name. I know you had a different name that you guys use at Renzo's, but how long has that move been being used at Renzo's Academy, and is it a Cummings move now?
It was certainly used before I got there. I hear some of the old school black belts, we call it a scorpion, talk about the scorpion from way back when, 2000. And I think Eddie Bravo will admit that too. Like, it's not like he invented, he saw it, he used it, he played with it. Maybe he came up with it organically on his own. I think that happens a lot. But yeah, it's been around for a while. It's been used a lot at the Academy. It is used to this day, quite often.
So when people see you and Gary doing it, and they say, "Hey, look, they're doing 10th Planet moves," how do you respond to that?
Yeah, they certainly are 10th Planet moves. They're also Renzo Gracie moves. I'm sure in the actual, the Gracie Torrance curriculum, they're in there too. It's hard to track down who came up with the technique in grappling. Yeah, it is very challenging to do that. If somebody saw it somewhere and they're like, "Oh, this guy showed me," then it's clear. But if you're playing around with stuff in the gym, it's hard to figure out who came up with it first. But yeah, it's an effective technique for sure, and people use it because of that.
EBI 3, you're going to be competing there alongside a lot of other really talented grapplers. How did you get the invite? How did you react when you heard about it?
I was extremely excited when I heard about it. Gary called me actually. He's like, "Look, that EBI coming up I'm doing." I'm like, "Yeah," because Gary was, of course, going to do it. He's like, "I talked to them, and I got you in."